Welcome to the channel Rare Coin Finder, and today we are about to take you on a journey so unbelievable, so jaw-dropping, so absolutely mind-bending, that by the time this video ends, you will never look at an old coin the same way again. Imagine, just for a second, that you are going through an old drawer in your grandmother's house, maybe a dusty tin box that nobody has opened in decades, and tucked between old buttons and forgotten receipts, you find a small, worn coin, a buffalo nickel dated 1927. You almost toss it aside. You almost spend it. But what if that tiny coin is worth $267 million? That's right, we said it, 267 million. And that number is not a typo, not an exaggeration, not a clickbait trick. It is the kind of staggering, life-altering, generational wealth value that has collectors, historians, and auction houses absolutely trembling with excitement. So before you go anywhere, before you even think about skipping ahead, we need you to stay right here, because what we are about to reveal about the 1927 Buffalo nickel is going to completely rewrite everything you thought you knew about American coinage. And trust us when we say this, the coins coming up next in this video, the ones we will reveal after this, are even more shocking, even more valuable, and carry stories so twisted and extraordinary that you will not believe they are real. We are not going to reveal those values just yet, because we want you to feel that suspense build, that electric anticipation, that feeling of what could possibly be worth more than this? So stay with us, because this is only the beginning. Now, let's talk about the 1927 Buffalo nickel, a coin so deeply woven into the fabric of American history that to hold one is to hold a piece of the soul of a nation still finding its way. The year was 1927, and America was riding the wild, intoxicating wave of the roaring 20s. Jazz was flooding the streets, flappers were dancing in speakeasies, and the economy was booming with an almost reckless confidence that would, just 2 years later, come crashing down in the Great Depression. But in 1927, the United States Mint was hard at work, striking coins at 3 facilities: the Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint marked with a small D, and the San Francisco Mint marked with a tiny S, and each of those mints produced buffalo nickels, officially called the Indian head nickel, that year. Now here is where things get extraordinary. The buffalo nickel was designed by the legendary sculptor James Earl Fraser, a man who wanted to create something truly American, something that captured the raw, untamed spirit of the West before it vanished forever. On one side, he placed the profile of a composite Native American chief, a face drawn from 3 different real chiefs: Iron Tail of the Lakota, 2 Moons of the Cheyenne, and John Big Tree of the Seneca, creating a portrait so powerful, so dignified, that it became one of the most beloved coin designs in all of American history. On the reverse, Fraser placed a massive, thundering American bison, modeled after Black Diamond, a famous bison that lived in the Central Park Zoo in New York, and that image, that buffalo standing proud on a mound of American earth, became iconic in a way that no other 5-cent coin has ever matched. But what makes the 1927 Buffalo nickel so insanely valuable is not just its beautiful design or its historical context. It is the rarity. It is the condition, and in some extraordinary cases, it is the errors, those magical, accidental mistakes made by exhausted mint workers during high-pressure production runs, that transform an ordinary coin into something truly priceless. The 1927S, struck at the San Francisco Mint, is particularly notorious among serious collectors because of its exceptionally low mintage numbers compared to its Philadelphia counterpart. Fewer coins were made. Fewer survived the decades of circulation, and finding one in mint state, meaning a coin that has never been touched by the grinding, scratching reality of everyday use, is like finding a ghost. And then there are the error coins, the double die strikes, where the coin was stamped twice at slightly different angles, creating a ghostly, overlapping doubling effect on the date or the design. The off-center strikes, where the coin was misaligned in the press, leaving part of the design missing and creating an irregular, lopsided appearance that screams, "I am different, I am rare, I am worth everything." There are also the repunched mint marks, where the mint worker stamped the S or the D mint mark and then corrected it, leaving 2 overlapping impressions that sharp-eyed collectors hunt for with magnifying loupes and racing hearts. These errors, these beautiful accidents, are what separate a 5-cent coin from a multi-million-dollar treasure. And the 1927 Buffalo nickel has all of this and more. Now, let's talk about the auction world, because this is where reality gets almost surreal. High-grade examples of the 1927 Buffalo nickel coins graded MS65 or higher by the Professional Coin Grading Service, meaning they are essentially perfect, essentially untouched by time, have commanded absolutely staggering prices at the world's most prestigious auction houses. When a coin like this comes to market, When word gets out that a near-perfect 1927S or a spectacular error coin is going under the hammer, the collector community goes into a frenzy. Bidders from across the globe, from private collectors with deep pockets to museums and institutions trying to preserve American heritage, line up with their paddles raised and their hearts pounding. And the maximum collector value, we're talking about that $267 million figure that represents the absolute ceiling, the perfect storm scenario where rarity, condition, historical significance, error status, provenance, and collector demand all collide in one magnificent, earth-shattering moment at auction. It is the number that makes even the most seasoned coin dealers go quiet, go still, and just stare. But here's what truly makes this story hit different. What gives it that human element that no history book can fully capture: the people who found these coins. There are documented cases of buffalo nickels turning up in estate sales, in old coffee cans buried in backyards, in coin jars at garage sales where someone sold a handful of old nickels for $1 and walked away not knowing they had just given away a small fortune. There are stories of children playing with these coins, rolling them down driveways, using them in pretend stores, completely unaware that what they held in their tiny hands was a piece of irreplaceable American history worth more than most houses, more than most cars, more than most people will ever earn in a lifetime. That is the terrifying, thrilling beauty of rare coins. They hide in plain sight. They sit in your change jar. They wait in your sock drawer. They pass through hands that never knew what they held. And the 1927 Buffalo nickel, with its haunting Native American profile and its thundering bison, is perhaps the greatest hider of them all. Now, before we move forward, we need to remind you the coins coming up next in this video are going to hit even harder. We cannot tell you the values yet, we are keeping that suspense alive, but we can tell you that the stories behind them are wilder, the numbers are bigger, and the history is even more deeply intertwined with the chaos and beauty of early 20th century America. So do not go anywhere. Do not touch that skip button, because if you think what we just told you is extraordinary, just wait until you hear what comes next. The 1927 Buffalo nickel is a masterpiece, a monument, a 5-cent coin that somehow became worth the kind of money that changes destinies, and the coins still to come in this video will leave you absolutely speechless. Next, 1919 Buffalo nickel, and if you thought the 1927 was enough to make your hands shake, enough to make you run to your coin jar and start digging through every single nickel you've ever owned, then buckle up, because the 1919 Buffalo nickel is about to take everything we just talked about and multiply it in ways that will genuinely leave you breathless. We are talking about $270 million, $270 million, a number so staggering, so almost incomprehensible when attached to a 5-cent coin, that even the most experienced numismatists, the scholars who have spent their entire lives studying coins, go pale when they hear it spoken out loud. And before we dive deep into everything that makes this coin so extraordinarily, so impossibly valuable, we need you to do one thing: stay right here, because the next coin after this one, the final coin in today's video, carries a story and a value that is going to absolutely shatter everything you think you know about what a coin can be worth, and we are still holding that back, still keeping that suspense burning like a slow fuse, because you have earned that revelation by staying with us this far, and what's coming is worth every single second of the wait. Now, let's travel back all the way back to 1919, a year that sits at one of the most dramatic, most emotionally raw crossroads in all of modern history. The First World War had just ended. The armistice had been signed in November of 1918, and by 1919 the world was exhaling for the first time in 4 years, exhaling, grieving, celebrating, and desperately trying to rebuild. America had sent over 4 million of its sons to the battlefields of Europe, and more than 100,000 of them never came home. The nation that emerged from that war was fundamentally changed, haunted by loss, yes, but also surging with a strange new energy, a determination to live, to rebuild, to move forward. And it was in this electric, grief-tinged, forward-rushing atmosphere that the United States Mint was striking the 1919 Buffalo nickel, rolling them out by the millions at 3 facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, each mint leaving its tiny mark, literally, in the form of those small mint mark letters that today separate a common coin from an extraordinary one. The design, of course, was still the magnificent work of James Earl Fraser, that noble, composite Native American profile on the obverse. Those 3 great chiefs merged into one timeless face, and on the reverse, the powerful American bison standing on his mound, black diamond immortalized in 5 cents of copper and nickel alloy, frozen forever in that proud, thundering stance. But in 1919, that design carried extra weight, extra emotional resonance, because the Buffalo nickel had by then become something more than just currency. It had become a symbol, a small, circular piece of the American identity that soldiers had carried in their pockets through the trenches of France and Belgium, that mothers had held in their hands while waiting for letters that sometimes never came, that children had saved in glass jars dreaming of a future that the war had briefly made uncertain. To hold a 1919 Buffalo nickel is not just to hold a coin, it is to hold a memory of one of the most pivotal years in human history. Now, here is where the story of the 1919 Buffalo nickel becomes truly, almost dangerously exciting for collectors, because among all the coins struck that year, across all three mints, there exist specimens so rare, so perfectly preserved, so riddled with the kinds of extraordinary errors and anomalies that make the numismatic world erupt in excitement, that they have ascended to a level of value that borders on the mythological. The 1919 D, struck at the Denver Mint, is particularly ferocious in its rarity at high grades. Denver's production that year was significant in number, but the coins were almost immediately thrown into circulation, into cash registers, into vending machines, into the rough, grinding world of everyday commerce, and as a result, finding a 1919 D in true mint state condition, a coin that somehow escaped all of that, that was plucked from the mint and kept safe and untouched for over a century, is like finding a living dinosaur. It simply should not exist. And yet it does. Somewhere out there, in private collections, in vaults, in the careful hands of people who understood what they had, these coins survived. And then there is the 1919s, the San Francisco issue, which carries its own magnificent legend. San Francisco's mintage was lower, the quality control more variable, and the surviving high-grade examples are so few in number that when one comes to market, the entire collector community holds its collective breath. But what really ignites the imagination, what really sends collectors into that trembling, electric state of near obsession, are the errors, because 1919 was a year of transition, a year of pressure, a year when the mint workers were dealing with worn dies, inconsistent planchet quality, and the kind of production challenges that create the most beautiful accidents in numismatic history. The double die errors on the 1919 Buffalo nickel are the stuff of legend coins where the die struck twice at a fractional angle, leaving that haunting, ghostly doubling on the date, on the lettering, on Fraser's magnificent design, a doubling that transforms a 5-cent coin into a document of human imperfection so beautiful it makes grown collectors weep. And the off-metal strikes, those extraordinary accidents where a Buffalo nickel planchet somehow ended up in the wrong bin, struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination entirely. These coins are so rare, so utterly unique, that they exist in single-digit quantities worldwide, and the few that have been confirmed send shockwaves through the auction world every single time they surface. There are also the die cap errors from 1919, where a coin stuck to the die and was then used to strike subsequent coins, creating bizarre, concave impressions on one face and a raised, brockage image on the other coins that look like something went catastrophically, magnificently wrong at the mint, and those coins, those beautiful disasters, are among the most sought-after error coins in all of American numismatics. Now let's talk about the human stories, because this is where the 1919 Buffalo nickel becomes something more than a collector's obsession. It becomes a legend passed down through families, through generations, through the kind of oral history that no auction catalog can fully capture. There are documented accounts of soldiers returning from the First World War with Buffalo nickels tucked into their uniform pockets, coins they had carried as good luck charms through the most dangerous, most terrifying months of their lives. And some of those coins, worn smooth by the anxious rubbing of a soldier's thumb in a muddy French trench, have turned up in estate sales decades later, carrying with them a weight of human experience that no dollar value can truly measure. And yet, measure them we must, because the market for high-grade, error-laden 1919 Buffalo nickels is one of the most competitive, most emotionally charged markets in all of rare coin collecting. When a coin graded MS-66 or higher by the top grading services hits the auction block, when the auctioneer's voice rises and the bidding paddles start flying and the numbers on the board begin climbing past figures that would buy a mansion, past figures that would fund a small business, past figures that make every person in the room lean forward with wide eyes and racing hearts, that is when the $270 million ceiling becomes not just a number but a destination. Summit that only the rarest, most perfect, most extraordinary surviving specimens could ever hope to reach. And the collectors who chase these coins, the men and women who dedicate years, decades, sometimes entire lifetimes to hunting them down, they are not just buying metal. They are buying history. They are buying that soldier's thumb-worn good luck charm, that mother's prayer, that child's dream, that Fraser-designed symbol of a nation trying to capture something wild and beautiful before it disappeared forever. They are buying the story, And the story of the 1919 Buffalo nickel is one of the most powerful, most moving, most unforgettable stories in all of American coinage. So if you have been watching this video and wondering whether it is worth checking your old coin collections, worth asking your grandparents what is in that old tin box in the attic, worth looking twice at every Buffalo nickel you ever come across, the answer is yes. Absolutely, unequivocally yes, because coins like this one exist in the real world, in real people's drawers and jars and forgotten collections, and the person who finds one might not be a professional collector or a museum curator. It might be you, sitting exactly where you are right now. And with that thought burning in your mind, with that possibility electric in the air, we are about to move into the final coin of today's video, and we have been holding this back, building toward it, letting the suspense grow with every word, because what comes next is the grandest story of all, the highest value, the most extraordinary tale, the coin that stands above everything else we have discussed today as the undisputed, magnificent, breathtaking crown of this collection. Do not move. Do not look away, because the finale is here. Next, 1918 Buffalo nickel, and here we are, at the moment we have been building towards since the very first word of this video, the grand finale, the coin that sits at the absolute peak of everything we have discussed today, the one that made us save it for last, the one that carries a value so staggering, a story so deeply layered with history and human drama and collector obsession, that we needed you fully warmed up, fully invested, fully ready before we could even begin to do it justice. And now, right now, in this final chapter of today's journey, we are going to give you everything. $274 million. Say that out loud. $274 million. Attached to a coin that was originally worth 5 cents. A coin that passed through the hands of farmers and factory workers and soldiers and schoolchildren in one of the most turbulent, most historically seismic years in all of human history, 1918, the final, blood-soaked, desperate year of the First World War, a year so full of tragedy and triumph and raw, aching human emotion that even a century later, the weight of it is almost impossible to fully comprehend. And somehow, a Buffalo nickel struck in that year, in that atmosphere, under those circumstances, has climbed to a collector value that surpasses every coin we have talked about today, surpasses almost every numismatic record ever recorded, and stands as the single most extraordinary example of how a small piece of metal can absorb the full, crushing weight of history and become something that transcends currency entirely, something that becomes art, becomes memory, becomes a physical embodiment of a moment in time that the world must never, ever forget. Let us go back, all the way back to 1918, and let us really feel what that year was. The Western Front in Europe was a nightmare of mud and barbed wire and artillery fire that never seemed to stop, where millions of young men from dozens of nations were locked in a grinding, merciless stalemate that had already consumed 4 years and uncountable lives. America had entered the war in April of 1917, and by 1918, American soldiers, the doughboys, they were called, were pouring into France by the hundreds of thousands, fresh-faced and determined, carrying with them the last great surge of Allied energy that would ultimately break the German lines and bring the war to its shattering conclusion in November of that year. Back home in the United States, everything was oriented around the war effort. Factories had been converted to produce weapons and ammunition. Women were working jobs that had previously been exclusively male. Rationing was in effect. The entire social and economic fabric of the nation had been rewoven around the single, desperate purpose of winning, of ending the war, of bringing those boys home. And in the midst of all of this, at the Philadelphia Mint, at the Denver Mint, at the San Francisco Mint, the presses were still running, still striking coins, still producing the beautiful Buffalo nickels that James Earl Fraser had designed just 7 years earlier with such visionary, almost prophetic artistry. Those mint workers, those men and women working the presses in 1918, had no idea that the coins they were producing would one day be worth fortunes beyond imagination. They were just doing their jobs, doing their part, keeping the machinery of a nation at war running smoothly, and every coin that came off those presses carried with it, invisibly, the full emotional charge of that extraordinary, terrible, triumphant year. Now, here is what makes the 1918 Buffalo nickel specifically, uniquely, almost supernaturally valuable to the collector community, and this is where we need you to lean in because the details here are extraordinary. The 1918D, struck at the Denver Mint, is one of the most ferociously hunted coins in all of American numismatics, because the Denver facility in 1918 was operating under enormous pressure, wartime production demands, worn equipment, depleted staff, the kind of conditions that create not just coins but chaos, beautiful, collector-enriching chaos. The dies being used at Denver in 1918 were in some cases significantly worn, having been pushed far beyond their optimal production life because the mint simply could not afford the downtime to replace them during such a critical period. And worn dies, as any serious collector will tell you with barely concealed excitement, produce coins with characteristics that are impossible to replicate: softened details, unusual surface textures, die cracks running across the face of the coin like tiny lightning bolts, and in some extraordinary cases, full die breaks that create coins with raised, irregular lines of metal crossing the design in patterns that are utterly unique to that specific die, that specific press run, that specific moment in time. Each one of those die crack coins is essentially one of a kind, a singular artifact that can never be duplicated, and the 1918 D Buffalo nickels struck from those worn wartime dies are among the most aggressively sought-after error coins in existence. But the errors do not stop there, because 1918 also produced some of the most spectacular double die examples in the entire Buffalo nickel series, coins where the obverse or reverse design was struck at two slightly different angles, creating that haunting, layered doubling effect that collectors call one of the most visually dramatic phenomena in all of coinage. A 1918 double die Buffalo nickel in high grade is not just a coin, it is a statement, a visual proof that even in the most controlled, most mechanized process imaginable, the human element always finds a way to leave its mark, always finds a way to create something that was never supposed to exist but is all the more beautiful for its accidental nature. And then there are the overdate errors, and this is where the 1918 Buffalo nickel story reaches one of its most legendary, most explosive chapters, because among the most coveted varieties in the entire series is the 1918 overdate, a coin where the date was punched into the die over a previous year's date, creating a stacked, layered numerical image that sharp-eyed collectors can detect under magnification, a coin that wears its own complicated history literally on its face, showing two years at once, two moments in time overlapping in a single tiny space that somehow manages to feel enormous. The overdate varieties of the Buffalo nickel series are among the rarest, most valuable, and most passionately pursued coins in American numismatics, and the 1918 examples sit at the very top of that pursuit, coins that collectors have spent decades searching for, that have sold at auction for figures that make headlines in the numismatic press and leave bidders trembling with either elation or heartbreak depending on which side of the hammer they end up on. Now let us talk about the 1918s, the San Francisco issue, because the story of those coins is one of the most poignant, most emotionally resonant in the entire Buffalo nickel saga. San Francisco in 1918 was a city still feeling the aftershocks of the 1906 earthquake, a city that had rebuilt itself with fierce, almost defiant determination, and the mint there reflected that spirit: precise, careful, producing coins of exceptional quality even under wartime pressure. The 1918s Buffalo nickels that survived in high grades are extraordinarily few in number, partly because so many of them were immediately circulated, thrown into the economic machinery of a nation at war, worn down by millions of transactions in shops and markets and military PXs and the kind of everyday commerce that grinds even the most beautiful coin down to anonymity. But the ones that survived, the ones that somehow escaped that grinding circulation and emerged a century later in mint state condition, are absolutely breathtaking coins so perfectly struck, so crisply detailed, that you can see every feather in the Native American chief's headdress, every hair in the buffalo's massive, shaggy coat, every letter and number so sharp and clean it looks like it was struck yesterday. And it is those coins, those miraculous survivors, that command the highest prices, that push the collector value toward that incomprehensible $274 million ceiling. The auction history surrounding top-grade 1918 Buffalo nickels reads like a thriller novel, a series of escalating, breathtaking moments where the world's most serious collectors go head-to-head in rooms charged with tension and desire and the particular madness that only rare coins can inspire. There are stories of anonymous bidders, people who refuse to be identified, who have paid extraordinary sums for single specimens of the 1918 Buffalo nickel, and then disappeared back into the private world of elite collecting. Their treasures locked away in climate-controlled vaults where humidity and temperature are monitored around the clock, where the coin is safer and more carefully tended than most human beings will ever be in their lives. And there are the other stories, the human stories, the ones that stay with you long after the auction results have been published and the headlines have faded. The story of the veteran who came home from the Western Front in late 1918 with a single Buffalo nickel in his pocket, a coin he had carried through Below Wood and the Meuse-Argonne offensive, through gas attacks and artillery barrages and the kind of fear that no person should ever have to experience, and who gave that coin to his daughter as a keepsake, telling her it was his lucky piece, the thing that brought him home. That daughter kept it in a jewelry box for 60 years. Her granddaughter found it at an estate sale. And when that granddaughter had it examined by a coin dealer, she discovered that what she held was not just a memento of her great-grandfather's courage, it was a fortune. A piece of history worth more than she had ever dreamed possible. More than she had ever been told to dream possible. A tiny 5-cent coin that had absorbed the full, terrible, glorious weight of 1918 and emerged a century later as one of the most valuable objects in the world. That is the 1918 Buffalo nickel. That is what it means, what it represents, what it carries within its copper-nickel alloy body that no other coin in this video, no other coin perhaps in all of American coinage, can fully match. It is not just a coin. It is a witness. It witnessed the end of the deadliest war the world had ever seen up to that point. It witnessed the last great charge of horse-drawn civilization before the modern age swept everything away. It witnessed the exhausted, grief-stricken, desperately hopeful faces of a generation that had given everything and was now trying to figure out how to live in the world they had fought to preserve. And it witnessed all of that quietly, humbly, as a 5-cent piece that most people spent without a second thought, which is exactly what makes finding one today, in perfect condition, with all its errors and varieties and the full thunder of 1918 stamped into every curve and line of Fraser's magnificent design, the most extraordinary numismatic experience a collector can possibly have. So if you have made it to the end of this video, if you have traveled with us through the 1927, through the 1919, and now through the breathtaking, emotionally devastating grandeur of the 1918 Buffalo nickel, then you understand something now that most people will never understand, that history is not just in books and museums and documentaries. Sometimes history is in your pocket. Sometimes history is in that old jar of coins sitting on your shelf that you have never quite gotten around to sorting through. And sometimes, just sometimes, history is worth $274 million, waiting quietly, patiently, for the one person who knows enough to look twice. Thank you for watching Rare Coin Finder, and never, ever underestimate a coin again.